Hello, this is Ms Hurst and we are going to be looking at how to answer longer response exam questions. So these are the questions in your exam that are going to give you those higher marks. You will need for this task 2 pens in different colours, be any colours, just different, and 2 pieces of A4 paper, preferably one will be plain and one will be lined, but it's not essential if you only have 2 plain or 2 lined pieces. And I also suggest adapting this tutorial to your normal way of working when you are completing an exam. If you are a student that is given extra time, there are times where I say to pause the video for 3 minutes. I would suggest that you pause it for 4 to give yourself that extra time. And if you are a student that works on a laptop, then I would suggest you actually work on a laptop and complete the task as you would in an exam, not on paper. The purpose of this video is to practice a technique for high mark questions that could be used during your actual exams. So it's important that you work in the way that you would be working in these exam conditions as well. So let's have a little overview of your exam. It's worth 100 marks in total, and you are given 1 hour and 45 minutes, if you don't have the extra time, to answer the whole paper. So that is 105 minutes in total to answer all of the questions. So a little bit of quick maths is that you have approximately 1 minute to spend per mark. So therefore, if a question is worth 1 mark, you should spend approximately 1 minute answering that question. If it is worth 10 marks, you should be spending at least 10 minutes on that question. So whilst you are working through your exam, you can keep yourself on target and you can make sure you are spending the appropriate amount of time on those longer questions as well. You will need at least 10 points to achieve the full marks for 10 mark question, generally. I will come back to this later, it's not as simple as that. If you were to write just one sentence, and I've seen this quite often, or leave the question completely blank, you will not get any marks at all, or possibly 1 mark for the one sentence that you have written. If it's a 10 mark question, we are really expecting quite a lengthy response to that question. So you're throwing those marks away. So it's always a good idea to have a go. You never know, you could pick up what I call accidental marks, and chances are there are a lot of clues in the question that will lead you onto actually picking up some of these marks. You will have the knowledge and you will know some of the answer. It's always worth having a go. When you are answering your questions in your exam, there will be just some different words at the start of each question. If the word is asking you to give, state or name, these ones will usually be towards the start of the paper. They're a bit of a warm-up, and they're designed to ease you into this paper and will be usually 1 mark, possibly 2 mark questions. So therefore, you're spending just a short amount of time per question on these. Then we go up in the difficulty and the amount of marks that are awarded as well. So if it's asking you to describe or outline, those are likely to be 2 to 4 mark questions. Explain, justify, maybe 4 to 6 mark questions. And then evaluate, discuss and compare are the big ones where you could expect to achieve around 10 marks for these, so maybe 8 to 12. This is what we're going to focus on today in this task, is these evaluate, discuss and compare questions. They are designed to stretch and challenge you as a candidate, and they require you to actually consider either a balanced argument or really showing the knowledge that you have. This is the question that we're going to look at. It is a question from a past paper. So this was a 2018 past paper. Question 8 is evaluate how food labelling informs and protects consumers. And this was awarded 10 marks in total for the answer of this question. So you can see that we have our buzzword there, evaluate. So this is requiring you as a candidate to stretch and challenge yourself with your answer. We're now going to look at the other key words. So for example, food labelling. The question is asking you specifically about the labelling of food. It's important that you hone in on this and underline this as a key word, and you are not answering the question with other irrelevant answers. It also asks you about how the food labelling informs, so how is it giving the information, how it protects, and it's asking it specifically about the consumers. So So you're not thinking about how the labelling is produced in a factory. You're not thinking about any other person that's going to be reading or designing the labelling, the manufacturing side of things or the production at all. You are thinking about the consumer and how the food label informs and protects the consumer. So make sure that you are underlining key words to ensure that your answer to this question is very specific to what it's asking. Because you could put down things that are correct, but if they're not what the question is asking you, you won't get the marks for them. You need your plain piece of A4 paper for this next bit. If you're working on a laptop, you might want to use a PowerPoint presentation and use a plain slide, or you may wish to do this next task, because it's a kind of rough working, on paper, and then when it comes to writing up the question answer, then you move on to your laptop then. As I said, however you would like to work during the actual exam, suggest you work like that. Now, in the middle of your plain A4 paper, using one of your coloured pens, doesn't matter which one, I'd like you to write food labelling, informs and protects. So this is going to give us our question subject is food labelling. We must make sure that we are focusing on how it informs and protects. And then what we're going to do is it's going to be a mind map. You've probably worked this out by now because you've put something right in the middle of a piece of plain paper. You're going to pause the video for 3 minutes in a moment, and you are going to add all the things you would expect to see on food labelling around your mind map. For example, you would expect to see what the food is. So a description of what is inside the food packaging would be on the food label. You would also expect to see the ingredients list. So I've given you 2 answers already. Aim for as many different things as you can think of. Remember, it is a 10-mark question. And don't worry about adding in any information about informing or protecting yet. At the moment, you're just doing headings of all the different things you'd expect to see on a food label of some food packaging. So pause the video for 3 minutes and then come back to the video once you've finished. Okay, so you should have paused for 3 and you should have a mind map that has got on it the 2 answers that I gave you already, what the food is and ingredients, and I'm hoping that you will have at least 3 more somethings that you would expect to see on some food labelling. I'm not going to give you all the answers yet, this is for you to work through. So you have at least, hopefully, 5 things around your central title. And next thing we're going to add on is informs and protects. So around each of yours, I'd like you to write the headings, informs, protects. You will need to write some information underneath these headings as well, so it might get a little bit messy, but this is our rough work anyway, so that's totally fine. You're still working in the same colour pen for this, so you don't need to swap colours at all, and you're just working around your subject heading in the middle. We are then going to work through what the food is together. So, what the food is, how does it inform the consumer? Well, it informs the consumer with a clear description of what they can expect to find inside the packaging. So it's not a surprise when they purchase and open it. That's what it does. It's describing what's in there. How does it protect the consumer? Well, by describing the contents, it protects the consumer from purchasing a product that is not what they wanted. It also gives an idea of the expected taste. For example, honey roast ham, as opposed to just ham, would let the consumer know there would be a sweeter taste to the meat. Equally, strawberry milkshake tells the consumer the taste will be of strawberries, as opposed to chocolate milkshake with taste of chocolate. So it may also indicate to the customer should look at the ingredients list because they may have any particular allergies or intolerances. So this is my suggestion of what I would answer with what the food is on the food label and how it informs and protects. You may also have some additional ideas as to how it's important that the food label has this information on it as well. So feel free to add that on too, as I'm not just giving you all of the answers, this is for you to do as well. And what I'd like you to do then is pause the video for another 3 minutes, and I'd like you to add the details of each of the items that you've put around your mind map and how it informs or protects the consumer. So I have given you a little bit of a hint with what you might find with the next one on ingredients, as if they have any particular allergies or intolerances maybe. So again, remember this is a 10-mark question. It's quite a high mark question. Aim for as many different things as you can think of. So pause the video now, approximately 3 minutes, and then come back. Okay, so after your 3-minute task, you should have a quite full A4 page of notes now. So we've got all of the information that you have been able to think of on the question. Evaluate how food labelling informs and protects consumers. Next step is for us to put all of this information into an answer. Top tip, do not repeat the question in the first lines of your answer. I see it all the time where the question is just repeated in the first couple of lines. You don't need to do it. It doesn't give you any marks. All it does is fills up the space, makes you think that you've written a lot, therefore you must have gained a lot of marks, and actually you don't, because it's not relevant, it's not suitable, it's just not useful, it's not going to give you any marks. There's no need to repeat the question when you give your answer. My suggestion is that you go around your mind map, and you take each of the legs, and you literally just write up the information as it is on your mind map, but as a paragraph. So for example, here's the one that we worked on together, what the food is, how it informs, how it protects, and the answers that I suggested. Here's your question, and I write my answer, and the only additional words that I've added at the start of my answer is food labelling. I've not repeated the question and said, food labelling informs and protects the customers by. I've just written, food labelling informs the customers with a clear description of what they can expect to find, and this is the exact words that I've taken from my mind map there. I then move on after the full stop, after it, onto the exact answer, again, directly from my mind map. If you have not written your mind map in full sentences, that's absolutely fine. You may need to bulk it out a little bit as you write up your answer. However, you cannot write in bullet points. So you can write it up in simple sentences and just put those simple sentences together to create a paragraph, but do not write in bullet points. So my suggestion now is to pause the video for 4 minutes. So you had 3 minutes for the initial task, 3 minutes for the next task, that makes 6. And as it's a 10-mark question for approximately 10 minutes, you have 4 minutes left now to write up the answer. Go round your mind map and write up each note you have written. Must be written in paragraphs, not bullet points. Okay, so you now have an answer for a 10-mark question, all written up and ready to mark. So, let's mark it. I'd like you to swap to your second colour pen, and for every answer that you got correct, give it a tick. So you're swapping to a second colour just so that it shows up and you can see it. I'm now going to go through the mark scheme and all of the answers that you could have potentially written, and if any of those are matching your answers that you've written, then give it a little tick and flick, so that we can see how many you got correct. So the start of the mark scheme says award up to 10 marks. You cannot get more than 10 marks in this question. And it then says that it is indicative content, so it's indicating the content that you could include. It says answers could include. That means it doesn't have to include. It's going to give a very long list of all the different things that you could potentially include. If you don't have all of them, it doesn't mean that you can't get the full 10 marks. It just means that it's giving you all of the possible answers that you could have written. So the first thing that it suggests that you could have written is about the law. So it's food labelling regulated under the Food Safety Act in 1990. If you've written about this, give yourself a tick. It also says that the food labelling regulations in 1996 describe the information that must be on a food label. If you've got this information in your answer, then tick that. If you haven't, not a problem at all. It then moves on to the first of the bullet points of the different things that you could have. So, name of the food. everybody should have that because we wrote that together. So a description of the food product, if the name of the product is not made clear, for instance lasagna. So you could have an example of a type of food, like I did with the honey roast ham or the milkshakes. Additionally, if the food product has been subjected to any special processing treatment, it must be made clear on the label. For example, smoking of meat, fish or cheese. So if you have any of this, give that a tick. If not, don't worry, move on to ingredients. If you've included that it's listed in descending order of weight as well, then you can tick for that. Ingredients are listed in the items that are included the most of, right at the very top, right down to the least. So the first 3 ingredients usually on the ingredients list make up the bulk of whatever the food item is. Quite interesting to look at if you're looking at sugar or salt content in particular, as to how high up the ingredients list that is. So it informs the customers about the ingredients used to make the food product, and it must include additives and any water as well, because that is still an ingredient. Moving on from additives, again, including E-numbers, for example. Food additives have a number of important functions, but despite this, there's an increasing demand for foods without them. So you may have included something called clean labels, because there are quite a lot of people that it can cause allergic or intolerant reactions, some of these additives that are included. So clean labels are where they are trying to reduce the use of the artificial additives by using natural substances instead. However, it can be difficult for food manufacturers to use as they are natural, and natural items are quite unstable actually, because they come from a plant or an animal origin. So therefore there's lots of different things that could impact on how the additive would react. Things like pH values or the animal itself and its own health and well-being and quantities. Whereas something that's synthetically produced is going to react and be in exactly the way that it's been created for. So although synthetic doesn't sound like it's necessarily better, sometimes it is a lot better for the manufacturers of products. But if you've written any kind of enhanced answer about additives, make sure you are ticking this in your answer. Any instructions for use, cooking and storage. So usually if you are opening something like a jar, it would say that must be opened, stored in a cool, dry place or in a refrigerator, and it would say how many days you would need to have to use up the item for. If you are buying something like that needs cooking, again, it would say how long to cook for, how to cook it. This prevents food spoilage, so you're protecting the customer from spoiling their food. There may also be some temperature guidelines on there, all to make sure that the food is safe to eat. Could have net quantity, so basically the weight or the volume of the food. So this is the quantity or volume allows the consumer to compare the cost of the food to determine their value for money. Quite often on the price ticket on the side of the shelf in the supermarket, it would tell you how much per weight each of the items is. So this is shown on the packet as well, so you as a consumer could work it out. The name and address of the manufacturer. So if there was an issue or you wanted to contact them in any way, then you would have this information, so you could seek further advice or make a complaint or contact them for whatever reason. And this is also the place of origin. This is different from the address of the manufacturer, because, for example, some fruit and vegetables are grown in warmer climates elsewhere, and they then come over and they are manufactured in the UK in a factory. However, their place of origin is from somewhere else in the world. You might find that with meat products, for example. A lot of our pork comes from Denmark, so it would say that it's EU pork, but the manufacturing of that pork into bacon could potentially happen somewhere within the UK. So those are two different things: place of manufacture and place of origin. Any special claims, so to inform the consumer about the suitability of a food product for people with intolerances and allergies, and also any specific nutritional claims. So if they are genetically modified in any way, if it's organic. So if you are somebody that only eats organic foods, obviously you'd be checking the labels really quite carefully, and it must be labelled clearly and appropriately. Any processing treatments, so this was covered earlier on a little bit about the UHT, so ultra heat treated milk or smoked fish, and pasteurised cheese, very important, especially for anybody that is pregnant as well. They're not able to eat this particular cheese as there is more of a chance of the infection of listeria. Frozen vegetables, but also frozen meat or fish as well, because it would inform the customer whether it is suitable to freeze at home if it has been previously frozen or not. So this is quite important. And the date mark system. So again, I've put all this in one slide, but there is potential for more than one mark for using this. You could have simply said that it informs the consumer about the length of time the product can be kept in optimum condition, and that's fine. Or you could have gone further and added more detail and explained the differences between the dates that the food needs to be used by. So a use by date is for high risk food, and this is telling the consumer that they must follow this date quite accurately, because once this date has passed, even though the food may look or taste very fine, it would potentially be very unsafe to eat. So it should be thrown away if it has a use by date on it. If it is a food item that has a best before date, this is low risk food, and therefore after this date, sensory characteristics, so taste, flavour, colour, smell, texture, would deteriorate, so it wouldn't taste quite so good. However, is not necessarily unsafe. It's just that it will taste better before that date. So after that date, it won't taste quite as nice. The display until, or a sell by date, is actually for the food retailers. So to ensure that they have the stock rotation and they would remove from the shelves by that date. So it's not a legal requirement, but it's just telling the retailer when they should display their food up until or try and sell it by. However, nutritional information is a legal requirement. So that's not the date to use it, that's the nutrition. So how much salt is in there, how much sugar is in there, how much fat's in there, that is a legal requirement as of 2016. Any voluntary information as well could be credited. So if you have written on there things like serving suggestions or opening instructions, so it's a particular type of packaging that would need instructions on how to open it, whether the packaging around the food is recyclable as well, then that is all, you can all get a mark for that information as well. It's not legally necessary, it's voluntary, it's put on the food label. So it also has that explanations and examples must be included within each mark band awarded. Okay, so what it's saying is your question was to evaluate, so therefore you must have included quite a lot of information with each of your points. And it also says that to accept any other acceptable response. So if you have something in your answer that I haven't covered from the mark scheme and you think is acceptable and is correct, then it would be down to the markers, the examiner's discretion, as to whether you would get a mark for it or not. So just whether it's acceptable, you'd have to make that call. So count up all of your ticks so that you have a total. Unfortunately, this does not necessarily mean it's the mark that you have been awarded for the question. We now need to look at the mark bands. So count up your ticks so that you have a total of how much information you have included, how many correct points you've made, and then we will take a look at the bands, and these are the bands here. So if you have between 4 to 5 ticks or more, then chances are you could potentially be right up the top here in the 8 to 10 mark band. If you do not have that many ticks, you cannot get 8 to 10 marks. You are in the band below. Okay, so if you do have that many ticks, then you now need to have a look at your answer and decide whether you have shown depth of knowledge and understanding of the labelling. Have you discussed each of your reasons, each of your items in full? Have you used specialist vocabulary? Have you been very accurate with your answer? So, for example, back to the dates on the food labelling. If you wrote that food labels need to include a date to use the food by, and that is all you wrote, that is not an excellent response. It's not very in-depth. It's not going to get you in this top band. You would be looking at the band below, between 4 to 7 marks, or even possibly the bottom band, 1 to 3 marks for that reason. Because you have not explained the differences between the different dates, the best before or the use by, and you've not explained the reasons why it's important that it informs and protects the consumer. So have a look at your answer again, have a look at each of the reasons you've given, and decide whether you have explored those reasons in lots of detail, or whether you think that actually you could have included a little bit more content to describe each of those. And that will then give you which band you are in. So if you think you've included lots and lots of detail, it's really clearly explained, you've really shown that you have lots of knowledge, you know your stuff, then you are up there in the top marks. If you have more than 4 to 5 reasons and they're all accurately explained, you're right there at the top. If you think that your reasons could have had a little bit more content, then decide where you are around the 4 to 7 marks and so on. And that will give you the mark for this 10 mark question. And now you have your mark for your question. So, although this is a revision or exam technique task, this method that we've just been through is perfectly acceptable to use in your actual exam. You will have space on the back pages of your exam paper, it usually says this is additional space, or the actual back of the paper itself. If you'd like it as a separate piece of paper, you can always ask for extra paper from your invigilators during your exam, and you can use this to do your mind maps. Okay, so the mind map itself will not be marked. The only things that are marked are the answers to your questions that are written directly below the question within the exam paper. Anything outside of this, you do not get marks for. So although it may seem like a bit of a waste of time to spend all that time making an answer and a mind map, it's a good way for you to ensure you are covering as many points as possible, as clearly as possible, instead of bouncing around all the different points you're making throughout a lengthy paragraph. Tend to find when I'm marking these longer response questions, there's a lot of waffle, which don't get you any marks at all. And quite often students will make a point at the very start of the question, they'll then cover a couple of others, and then they'll go back to the initial point they made and add a little bit more, and it just makes it quite messy, and they don't necessarily get any more marks for coming back to that point again. All they're trying to do is fill up the lines given for the mark, because they feel like the more they write, the more marks they're likely to get, and that's not necessarily the case. So as I explained at the start, 10 marks is approximately 10 minutes available time to work through the question, and this is more than enough time to make a mind map and write up your answer during your exam. So as we've just worked through, we had 6 minutes worth of mind map, then we had 4 minutes worth of writing up the answer. Obviously you wouldn't be marking it like we've just done as well, but bear in mind how it will be marked, because this is an actual exam question that we've just worked through from the 2018 exam, and that was the mark scheme that we've worked through as well. So that is how your exam that you are going to do will be marked the same way. So now you have your mark, your 10 mark question, and you have a revision or an exam technique that's suggested to use. So make sure that you remember this and practice this and try and use this when you are answering your questions.